Hey everyone, Matthew back at the Hub. And if you don't know it, you are in the Matrix with Matthew right now. This first segment is one that I want to have a whole continuing segments on the sensation of freedom, conversations about the sensations of freedom. And I'm going to give insights about it, but I have other people come through talking about this same thing, because right now in this culture, in this time, I think we're all feeling powerless, like we can't do things and may affect change, and it's causing us to lose freedom. And when that happens, we lose creativity, right? So the sensation of freedom, Mind Body Solutions, one of our methodologies is to take abstract notions and ground them through the body, because we believe that the body informs the mind as much as the mind informs the body. So there are certain things, abstract notions, that to the mind remain abstract and intangible, but when they're realized through the body, it changes your whole outlook. So one of the things I want you to think about before we start is I want you to think about the sensation of freedom that you hold in your mind now, or the notion of freedom. What does that mean to you? Do you immediately think of a prison? Let us know. Let us know what you think is your starting point of the sensation of freedom. Now, to explore this in this first segment, I want to read for you. Everything to me starts from a story. So to me, this is an encounter I had. I wrote this in a blog. It's on tumblr.com back in 2017. At that time, I was in the hospital. I had had an infection. I was really sick. My fever was going up and down, so I was lacking freedom. I was not in control of how my fever would go, whether the bacteria was going to get through my whole body, and I was about to be really sick. So I was, in very many ways, like anyone in the hospital in acute care, lacking the sensation of freedom. And I had an encounter, and I want to read from this, with a nurse that made me rethink about it, and I want this to be the launching point of this segment. I had great nursing care while at Methodist Hospital, including Shannon, Angie, Caitlin, David, and Timaeus. There was also a nurse named Walter. He was from Kenya, having moved from the U.S. after high school. Now he's in his mid-30s. Walter was quiet, strong, hardworking, a husband and a father of two. He spoke with an accent and a sparkle in his eyes that clearly was not from this country. I was lucky to get him talking during one of his double shifts with me. Once fully heard and truly acknowledged, Walter lit up with stories. I asked a standard question and received an unexpected response. What do you miss most about where you're from? Walter's eyebrow rose as his eyes and his gaze met mine. Now for the first time, two human beings were truly making contact. He said, "Really?" I nodded. Then with a gentle smile and a laugh, he said, "Okay, let me think about it." And he left the room. He came back a couple hours later and said something like, "Don't take this the wrong way. This is a country of opportunity, and I love it here. But this is not a country of freedom." As he said this, he looked away from the IV tubing and saw the quizzical look on my face. He continued, "It has taken me years to figure this out. But what I really miss is the feeling I have when I land back in Kenya. When I step off that plane, I feel freedom. I do not feel that freedom here." Clearly, the quizzical look remained on my face. He laughed again. "You have so many rules here, both visible and invisible. Who you can talk to and who you can't. Everyone is so distant, so occupied, and everything is monetized. Everything costs. I have to pay for more things here than I could have ever imagined." He looked away and said, "What I truly miss is a simpler life." And yet Walter said he would never want to leave this country. Then he came back a couple hours later and was talking about a situation where, and he was angrily said, "How can a number tell you who I am?" Walter was referring to trying to get a loan to buy a house for his family, to purchase a house, and his credit score, which he'd never heard of, came up because he had no credit history. And they looked at the credit score instead of looking at his life and said, "Sorry, we can't give you a loan." So I think back, and I was laying there in the hospital, and I was thinking back about what I thought about freedom and about my conceptions of this country, and thinking that that it's a land of opportunity. I've been told it's a land of freedom. And then I started thinking about what it is and how Walter was constrained. Like that, and we live in a culture where you do have to worry about what you say, especially now, and you're worried about saying the right thing, and you're trying to fit in, and all these should and shouldn'ts, all these shackles that are on our interaction. Now, what's interesting is that those are still progress, right? Those are still things that are a progressive consciousness, but at the same time, something's being lost. And so when Walter lives in the world, the complexity of living here, right, and then goes to Kenya, he metaphorically can see the blue sky better because he's not preoccupied in something else. So I'm really curious about when I imagine that interaction of when constraint that you didn't know you were carrying turns into freedom. What does that feel like? I'm sure it's not just a thought for Walter as he steps off the plane and steps into his homeland. I'm sure it's more than that. It's like a feeling of hope and expanse and of freedom. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about when are times that you feel that contrast from constraint, from the load you didn't even know you were carrying, to a feeling of lightness and exposure. This is one of those things that I believe in our work at Mind Body Solutions, with things like freedom, we have to start studying it as a sensation so we can create it for ourselves, because clearly the world is not going to be able to be just how we want it. And that being said, part of the freedom is the unknown, is letting more in. So I know this sounds like a crazy comparison, but think about something really simple. What do you do at the end of the day when you come home and you take off your shoes right away from a long day at work, and you have that feeling of what? What's that feeling of your feet all of a sudden get the relief of not being constrained? I think that's one of the quintessential sensations of freedom that each of us have. That I think that freedom is something that we need to start exploring in everyday occurrences, in everyday little things, because I think we have more of it than we think, but we don't let it come through our bodies. I like to say when I do public speaking, it's like you got to let the dogs bark, take off your shoes. But it's so interesting when I'm in a group of people, right? When I'm doing a public speaking thing, when I say take off your shoes, everyone looks at me with suspicion, because that's not something you do. You don't allow yourself, your body, to feel the sensation of freedom while you're being productive. I'm not sure why that is. I am always advocating for people at work to take off their shoes under their desk, to have more of that sensation. So I know it seems overly simple, but what are the other places in your life? We'd love to hear, like analogous to taking off your shoes. What are some things that you actually experience, little pockets in your life where you take a little extra second and know that you're free? Know that you have that moment that includes both your mind and your body, and you know and connect it. You might not think of it as freedom, but I think you should. And this is part of what our culture needs to reboot to help us get more creative, to help us deal with what looks like things that are out of our control. So that's the first installment. I want to continue this conversation. Any thoughts you have on the sensation of freedom and places you have it, please write them in and we'll share them in another segment. All right, until we meet again in the Matrix. Hey, I'm back. If you liked what you saw, there's more coming. To keep up with new releases, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on your notifications. But know, In the Matrix is intended as an ongoing conversation. Please share with your comments, thoughts, and suggestions, and you may even reshape our next encounter in the Matrix.